Good. I am now going to talk on behalf of some of my colleagues, Ramon, Àlvarez, David Asensio, Rafel, Jornet, Menéndez, Jordi, Jaume, Noguera, and myself. And I'm going to give you an indigenous perspective on the nature of Phoenician commerce in the Western Mediterranean. So the Mediterranean Sea shaped the reality of communities living along its shores, and the sea extends to its navigable rivers. Up until now, the talks have focused mainly on the Eastern Mediterranean, with the exception of Angela. But it must be noted, however, that long-distance trades can be attested from the east to the west. So I would like now to focus on a small area of the Western Mediterranean where a phenomenon occurred that can be applied all over the Mediterranean. I'd like to introduce you to a few concepts that concern not only the seafarers and the foreign merchants like the Phoenicians, but also those who lived permanently on the shores of the Mediterranean. That's the area. Before that, many studies have tried to understand the nature of Phoenician commerce in the Western Mediterranean and the motives for these traders to exchange their products in the northeast of the Iberian Peninsula. In this context, indigenous societies have been ignored numerous times and seen as acculturated or even as inferior populations with no decision power in this exchange network. This is something that not only happens in the Western Mediterranean, where I'm currently focusing my research, but also in many other areas that the other presenters have talked about throughout this session. I will now talk about the case of this northeast of the Iberian Peninsula, where River Ebro is located. And here we've got River Ebro. This river is approximately between 100 and 300 meters wide, making it a unique river with the capability of being navigable. The communications network in this area is dependent on a mountainous orography. So north to south communications are ensured by the Ebro Valley itself, using the territory as a land of river navigation and easy access for seafarers. The land road network between the coast and the interior is forced to follow a reverse alignment into the east-west direction, following the basins of the Ebro's tributary rivers, which are Àlvarez and Matarranya in the northwest, and Siurana to the east, as well as River Senia to the south. This also reminds us that seascapes reached the inland through navigable rivers, that there would be virtually no difference between navigating along the shore or through a river such as this one. We see this phenomenon of fluvial navigation in many places throughout the Mediterranean. Evidence from the Ebro area has pointed out an endogenous explanation for these Phoenician seafarers to commercialize with indigenous groups. These exchanges seem to concentrate in areas where the presence of complex societies that include elites is attested prior to the arrival of foreign merchants. On this map, you can see a few settlements that operated through the course of the 7th century and that have yielded Phoenician materials. From the 9th century, the south of the Iberian Peninsula experiences the arrival of Phoenician populations, and in the middle of the 7th century, the Phoenician colonies of the south of the Iberian Peninsula are immersed in a dynamic of commercial expansion on a large scale, and Phoenician colonizers seem to have settled in Zacaleta, Ibiza. And so the Phoenician need for metal source is what has traditionally forged the idea of a Phoenician initiative in the West. It is in the 7th century or late 8th that we start seeing Phoenician activity around the Ebro basin, which in turn consists of a network that connects the sea to metallurgical sources. For instance, the mining area of Molar-Bellmunt-Falset by the Siurana River. This would explain the great abundance of southern peninsula amphorae in the Ebro and the existence of indigenous materials in the colony of Zacaleta, thus responding to the commercial objective of this colony. During the first phase of contact, the arrival of Phoenician materials is sporadic. They develop between the end of the 8th century and the middle of the 7th century. And this is confirmed by the punctual arrival of amphorae type 10.111 and by bronze objects as well as some ceramics associated to Phoenician ceramics at the site of Barangagafus. A second stage took place between the second half of the 7th century and the beginning of the 6th century, where the will to open routes and new markets is evident, and where there is a large influx of Phoenician products, basically contained in amphorae 10.121, accompanied by pithoi, jars, and mortars, but as in the previous period, with a very low proportion of crockery. And a third and last stage, which would cover the first half of the 6th century, where the arrival of Phoenician products from the south of the peninsula decreases drastically, which are replaced by other materials, some of which still have Phoenician characteristics, but in many cases incorporating Greek or indigenous assemblages. Therefore, we must not only pay attention to the reason why Phoenicians were interested in this area, but also the motives why indigenous populations may have been keen on undertaking these exchanges. We are talking about pigment societies, that is, tribes and early forms of chiefdoms led by an authority that had the need to distinguish themselves from the rest of the population. The Phoenicians would have supplied the local elite's demand for prestige goods. These goods would have been materialized in amphorae from the south of the Iberian Peninsula, this time to the commensality practices of the local elites, different from the rest of the population, as well as some crockery, such as drinking vessels, bowls, or plates, suggesting Phoenician practices may have been adopted. It is reasonable to think that the heads of the lineage that controls the resources that the Phoenicians wanted, especially, of course, metals, and perhaps also quality wood, and all controls as well the media that allowed access to these objects that the Phoenicians wanted, were able to acquire one advantageous position in relation to their counterparts. This not only happened with Phoenician vessels and practices, coming first from Ebro and then from Carthage, but also Greek, as some Greek amphorae start arriving from the Greek colonies in the northeast of the peninsula and change the commensality patterns that were established until then. We can see then that the Phoenicians did not control the market, but that it would have been the local elites that would have chosen what to buy in each moment, making trends. So these long-distance contacts are attested all over the Ebro basin in different levels of intensity. Firstly, the maximum intensity area would be located in the south. Yep. Here in this area, where River Senia and Ebro's river mouth are, with settlements like San Jaume and Aldovesta, from where commerce would spread to the Siurana River and its mining area of Molar-Bellmunt-Falset. And secondly, this area, peripheric area beyond, arriving to the region of Matarranya, reminding us that all cultural groups and their social complexities should be considered when assessing the nature of commerce. The river mouth of the Ebro basin is where most of the Phoenician activity can be attested. However, some sites seem to have had a higher intensity of contacts than others, making us distinguish between commercial areas where elites might have encouraged exchanges and indigenous housing settlements. Aldovesta's exceptional amount of imports has always been viewed as one of the main focuses of exchange, and even as a fluvial warehouse. One possibility is that small boats would have reached Aldovesta through the river, and once the cargo was stored, the trip to the surrounding sites would have continued by other means. Therefore, the site of Aldovesta, and possibly the recently and ongoing excavated site of San Jaume suggests this control of resources by the local elites. Proof is the presence of a very high number of Phoenician amphorae in both sites, as well as prestige items, especially in San Jaume, as well as the evidence of metal ingots in Aldovesta. Moreover, this is the key that explains the development of social complexity and the formation of the centralized political entities of territorial scope that characterize the transition into the Iberian culture itself. The birth of Iberian culture implies, from the point of view of social organization, the appearance of hereditary inequality. Imports as prestige goods had to become distinctive elements of aristocracy. The mining area of Molar-Bellmunt-Falset has moreover documented how pre-existing settlements by the Sudana River had connections with those Phoenician merchants or the local intermediaries from, for instance, Aldovesta. The settlements from this mining area, like Almolà or Puigrot, have indeed proved mining and metallurgical activity, as well as presence of imports that could have given exclusivity and a luxurious character to their owner. The peripheric area beyond the mouth, arriving at the region of Matarranya and Àlvarez, has also yielded imports. The settlement of La Clota de Calacé, for instance, has suggested the existence of an emerging elite that is also willing to obtain prestige goods as means of consolidation of their authority between the late 8th and throughout the course of the 7th century, as can be attested from the 2 bronze fragments found belonging to an Oriental tripod, presumably Cypriot, preserved as a heirloom by a wealthy family. Towards the 6th century, change also occurs in this area. Queries from Las Ferreras appears to come from the south of France, implying this need by the local elite to change its source of prestige objects to differentiate themselves. Other prestige objects from the same time include a bronze tent with a horse and a plate with an omphalos that appear to have been inspired by other Mediterranean references. From the 7th century BC, contact with Phoenician societies and also with the Phoceans from the following century on was an essential factor in the social and economic development of the indigenous communities in the territory of current Catalonia, since in a general context of change and rapid evolution towards complexity, offered indigenous elites new opportunities for differentiation and control over the rest of society. This does not mean, however, that the Mediterranean civilizations appeared in the eyes of pre-Iberian and Iberian peoples as superior, and were both as models to imitate or ideals to achieve. Acquisition by indigenous societies of materials of exotic origin is clearly selective and can be understood in all cases that we have analyzed, depending on the social control strategies used in every moment by the leading elements, rather than by a supposed attempt at assimilation to the cultures where these materials were produced. This does not mean that some exotic products and habits were not adopted, for example, in the forms of consumption of alcoholic beverages or in the type of cuisine. But this incorporation of foreign practices seems limited to the ruling class, and probably it is explained rather than by a desire to identify with foreign cultures, by the necessity of the elites to differentiate themselves from the rest of their own society and to find in the outside one of the sources of legitimation of its privileged status. During the 6th century, Phoenician imports decreased and Greek imports increased. It must also be remembered that one of the strategies of the elites to preserve the prestigious condition of certain goods is often to change their origin and nature. All this favored the possibility that the Phoceans, established in Massalia from around 600 BC and specialized in long-distance transport products of a more varied origin, extended their radius of action in the Iberian Peninsula and replaced the Phoenicians as suppliers of a number, now very small, of prestige goods. Oh, sorry about that. These interpretations of hybridity and cultural context can be applied on other settlements and areas like the Levant or the Aegean, and especially I thought a lot about Homos. So I hope these conclusions I drew on the first millennium in the Western Mediterranean Sea were useful or interesting for all of you, regardless of the territory and chronology your research is based on. So if you have any questions, thoughts, or suggestions, I would be really happy to listen to them, as I am aware that this can be a very controversial topic, and every researcher might have a different point of view that can contribute to our understanding of past societies and their interactions. So thank you very much for your attention.